The desert was quiet that night. The wind carried a dry chill across the small town, rattling old shutters and stirring dust along the empty road. Inside his small wooden house on the edge of town, Daniel sat alone with a lantern burning low. He lived a simple life, far from noise, far from chaos. His home was plain but steady, like him. He was not used to visitors, especially at night. That was why the sound startled him so much. It was soft at first, almost like the cry of an animal, but then it grew sharper. It was the sound of a baby. Daniel froze. He thought perhaps his ears had deceived him, but the cry came again, faint yet unmistakable. He stood up slowly, pushed back his chair, and walked toward the door. His hand hovered over the knob as the crying grew louder, echoing against the wooden walls of his porch. With a deep breath, he pulled the door open. There she was. A young woman stood in the shadows, her dark hair loose and tangled, her face pale in the moonlight. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in an old cloth. The child inside kicked and cried, tiny hands reaching out. The woman's eyes were filled with fear, but also with something else. Desperation. She looked at Daniel, her lips trembling, and for a brief second their eyes met. She whispered something so soft he almost didn't hear. "Please and help." Her voice cracked, filled with sorrow. Before Daniel could answer, she gently placed the bundle down on the wooden floor by his boots. Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to call out, to ask what she was doing, but the woman was already backing away. Her bare feet barely touched the porch before she turned into the night. He took a step forward, confused, but the baby cried again, pulling his attention down. The child squirmed in the blanket, so small, so fragile. Daniel knelt slowly, his large hands shaking as he reached out. He had never held a baby before. He had never even thought he would. Yet now here one was, left at his door like a gift he never asked for but somehow could not refuse. He picked up the child carefully, almost afraid the little one would break under his touch. The baby calmed a little in his arms, blinking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked back into the night where the woman had disappeared, hoping she would return. But all he saw was darkness, the desert stretching endlessly under the cold sky. Closing the door slowly, Daniel carried the baby inside. The lantern light flickered across the walls, casting long shadows as he set the bundle down on his table. He stared at the child for what felt like hours, though only minutes passed. Who was she? Why had she left her baby here? And why him, of all people? He had lived in this town for years, yet he kept to himself. He was a man of routine, not someone strangers sought for help. Yet she had chosen his door. The baby fussed again, pulling at the cloth. Daniel sighed, scratching his beard. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he muttered. His voice, though rough, carried a hint of softness that surprised even him. He rummaged through his kitchen, searching for something the baby could drink. All he had was water, some bread, and dried meat. He knew none of that would do. Frustration rose in him, but so did determination. He could not just let the child starve. The next morning, after little sleep, Daniel wrapped the baby in a clean shirt and carried the bundle into town. The townsfolk were curious, whispering as he walked by with a child in his arms. At the general store, Mrs. Harper, an older woman with a kind but sharp tongue, raised her eyebrows. "Daniel Reed, what on earth is that you've got there?" she asked, peering at the child. Daniel explained as best as he could, though he left out details of the mysterious woman. He was not ready to share that part yet. Mrs. Harper sighed, then guided him to a shelf. "You'll need milk, proper bottles, and cloth. Lord knows you can't feed a baby bread and water." She shook her head, but her eyes softened as she helped him gather what he needed. Back at home, Daniel struggled. Feeding, rocking, and soothing were all new to him. The baby cried often, and every time Daniel panicked, worried he was doing something wrong. But slowly, with patience and trial, he learned. He learned how to cradle the baby in his arms, how to hum softly to quiet the cries, how to check if the little one was hungry or tired. Each small success filled him with pride he did not expect. The nights were the hardest. Alone in the dim glow of his lantern, he often looked at the sleeping child and thought of the woman who had left her here. What kind of life had she lived, and why had she trusted him? Daniel remembered the fear in her eyes, the way her voice broke when she begged him to help. He could not stop thinking about it. Somewhere out there she was walking the desert, maybe hiding, maybe suffering, but she had left her most precious gift with him. Days passed and Daniel's bond with the baby grew. He started calling the child Little Star because the eyes reminded him of the way stars sparkled in the night sky. Bright, innocent, and full of mystery. The name brought a strange comfort to him, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. His life, once quiet and empty, now carried purpose. Every morning he rose not for himself but for Little Star. Yet beneath that growing bond, questions still haunted him. What if the woman never returned? What if danger followed her to his doorstep? And what if someday soon someone came to take the child away? One night, as Daniel rocked Little Star by the window, the desert stretched before him like an ocean of shadows. He thought he saw movement far out by the ridge, but when he blinked, it was gone. He told himself it was only his imagination, but deep down he wondered. The woman had vanished. But maybe she was still out there watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. For now, all Daniel could do was hold on to the baby and hope he was strong enough to face whatever came next. The days rolled by, and Daniel found himself in a life he never imagined. His house, once silent and empty, now echoed with the cries and laughter of the baby. At first, the cries had been a trial for him. He had stumbled through long nights, rubbing his eyes in exhaustion, trying to figure out what the child needed. But with each passing day, he grew more confident. He learned the rhythm of the baby's breathing, the signs of hunger, and even the soft noises that came right before sleep. The townsfolk could not stop talking. Daniel Reed, the quiet man who always kept to himself, was now walking through the market with a child strapped across his chest. Some people smiled warmly at him. Others whispered behind his back. They wondered where the baby had come from and why Daniel, of all people, had suddenly become a caretaker. Maybe he has family we never knew about, one woman said. Or maybe the mother just ran off, another replied. Daniel heard the whispers but ignored them. He did not owe anyone an explanation. The truth was complicated, and until the woman came back, it was his secret to keep. Still, he needed help. On his second trip to town, he found himself standing again in front of Mrs. Harper's counter at the general store. The old woman eyed him with suspicion, but also with a kind of pride. "Well, I'll be," she muttered, watching Daniel bounce the baby gently. "You're getting the hang of it. Didn't think I'd see the day you'd be carrying little ones." Daniel gave her a small nod, avoiding her gaze, but inside he felt a strange warmth. She had noticed. People were noticing. At home, Daniel began to create new routines. His mornings started with preparing warm milk, carefully checking the temperature, and then feeding the baby with slow patience. After that, he would clean the bottles, set the laundry on the line, and then sit outside with the child in his arms. He found himself humming songs he had long forgotten, tunes his mother once sang when he was small. The baby's eyes would widen as if listening, and then close slowly as the sound carried them into sleep. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Daniel sat rocking the baby near the fire. He thought about the woman who had left her child with him. He could still see her face in his mind, frightened, desperate, yet filled with a fierce kind of love. She had not abandoned her child out of neglect. No, she had made a choice, a painful one. She had trusted him, a stranger, because she had nowhere else to go. Daniel could not shake the feeling that she was still out there, struggling with shadows he could not see. Late that night he dreamed of her. In his dream, she was running through the desert with the baby in her arms, chased by figures he could not name. When she stumbled, the child nearly slipped from her grasp. She turned to him, calling his name, though he had never told her who he was. He woke with a start, sweat dripping from his forehead, the baby sleeping soundly beside him. Dreams, he told himself. Just dreams. But the weight in his chest remained. The following morning, Daniel took the baby into town again. This time he stopped at the blacksmith's shop. James, a sturdy man with arms like iron, looked up and raised his eyebrows. "Well, I'll be," Daniel Reed with a little one. "That's a sight." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see you with family." Daniel only offered a quiet smile and adjusted the baby's blanket. He said little, but the look in his eyes told James there was more to the story than anyone guessed. As he walked through the streets, People continued to stare. Some children followed him, curious about the baby. An older man sitting outside the saloon muttered, "That ain't his, I bet. That child's got Apache blood." Daniel stiffened at the words but kept walking. He knew they were right. The child's features carried the mark of the Apache people. It was no secret, but the way the man had said it carried bitterness, as if it was something shameful. Daniel tightened his hold on the baby. Whatever blood ran through the child's veins, it did not change the simple truth. This was an innocent life, worthy of love and care. That evening, Daniel sat by his window, staring out at the desert. The baby lay wrapped in a soft blanket on his lap, sleeping peacefully. He thought about the child's mother again. What had driven her to his door that night? Why had she chosen him? He was not a man known for kindness. He kept to himself, rarely speaking to anyone. Yet she had trusted him with her most precious treasure. Perhaps she had seen something in him he could not see in himself. Over the next few days, Daniel noticed something surprising within himself. The loneliness he had carried for years began to fade. The silence of his home, once heavy and unending, was now filled with life. He found himself smiling at the smallest things. The baby's tiny hands gripping his finger, the sound of a laugh that bubbled out unexpectedly, the way the child's eyes followed him around the room. He was changing, though he did not say it out loud. At the same time, he could not shake a growing unease. On 2 separate nights, he thought he heard footsteps outside his house. When he opened the door, the desert stretched before him, empty and silent. But the feeling remained, that someone was watching. He wondered if it was her, the mother, staying near but not ready to show herself, or perhaps it was someone else, someone dangerous, following her trail. The thought chilled him, and he pulled the baby closer each time, whispering, "Don't worry, I'll keep you safe." On the 4th day, Daniel was sitting outside with the child when Mrs. Harper walked by. She stopped, folding her arms as she looked at him. "Daniel," she said firmly, "you can't keep raising that baby alone forever. If the mother doesn't come back, what then? Do you plan to carry on like this?" Her tone was not unkind, but it was sharp, like she was testing him. Daniel looked down at the baby, then back at her. His jaw tightened. "If I have to, yes," he said quietly. "I'll carry on." Mrs. Harper studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Then you'd best be ready. It's not an easy road." With that, she walked away. That night, Daniel stayed awake long after the baby had fallen asleep. He sat by the window, staring out at the endless dark. The words of Mrs. Harper echoed in his mind. She was right. It would not be easy. He had no family to help him, no wife, no parents. But he also knew he could not turn away. He had been, given this task, chosen for it in a way he did not understand, and until the mother returned, he would not fail. The desert was silent, but his heart was not. Somewhere out there, the woman who had left her baby at his door was still walking her own hard road. He did not know when or if she would come back. But Daniel knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a solitary man. He was a protector now, and no matter what whispers filled the town, no matter what dangers waited in the shadows, he would not let this child suffer. He would not let the trust placed in him be broken. And though he did not know it yet, the woman who had vanished would return soon, bringing with her the truths and struggles he could never have imagined. Days passed, and the rhythm of Daniel's life began to settle into something almost natural. He no longer fumbled with the bottles or panicked at the sound of the baby's cries. Instead, he moved with quiet confidence, soothing the child with gentle words and calm hands. The little one, whom he still called Little Star, brought a kind of light into his house that had never been there before. The walls no longer felt so heavy with silence, and even the desert winds seemed softer when they blew against the windows. But beneath that new peace, there was always a tension waiting in Daniel's heart. He knew the woman who had left the baby would return one day. Whether it would be to take her child back or to explain the truth, he did not know. Still, every time he heard a sound outside, his breath caught. Every time the floor creaked at night or a shadow moved near the edge of the desert, he thought of her. He remembered the fear in her eyes that night, the trembling of her hands as she laid the baby at his door. He knew she had not acted without reason. He knew her story must have been heavy. It was a cool evening when it happened. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky with streaks of purple and gold. Daniel was sitting on the porch with the baby in his arms, rocking slowly as the last birds of the day flew overhead. The child cooed softly, blinking sleepily at the changing sky. Daniel almost let himself believe it was going to be another quiet night. Then he saw her. At first, she appeared like part of the desert itself, a shadow moving along the ridge. Then as she drew nearer, the lantern light revealed her face. It was the same young Apache woman, her features tired, her hair tangled from wind and dust. She wore the same expression of fear and strength he remembered, though this time her eyes were brighter, more determined. She stopped at the edge of his porch, clutching the thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The baby stirred in Daniel's arms as if sensing the presence of its mother. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "You kept her alive." Daniel nodded slowly. "She's safe here." His voice was steady, but inside his chest his heart pounded. He waited for her to step forward to take the baby back. He thought about how it would feel to let go after these long days and nights. After all the work and the bond he had built, he knew it would hurt more than anything. But he also knew the baby belonged to her. She took one slow step onto the porch. Her eyes stayed fixed on the child, wide and filled with both relief and sorrow. She reached out a trembling hand, then pulled it back, almost afraid. "I didn't know if I'd make it back," she said softly. "There were men following me. I had to keep them away from her. I thought, if I left her here, maybe she'd be safe. Maybe you would help." Daniel studied her face, searching for answers. He saw exhaustion etched into every line of her features, but he also saw something fierce, a mother's love that had driven her to impossible choices. "You trusted me with her," Daniel said. "Why?" Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. "Because I had no one else. My family is gone. My people scattered, and the ones who chased me would never think to look for her here with you. I saw you once in the market. You were alone, but there was kindness in your face. I took a chance. I prayed it was the right one." For a moment, silence hung between them. The crackling of the lantern was the only sound. The baby let out a soft cry, and Daniel shifted, rocking her gently. The woman's eyes softened at the sight, her hand moving to her mouth as if to hold back a sob. Daniel cleared his throat. "If you've come to take her back..." His voice broke and he had to stop, swallowing hard. "If you've come to take her, I won't stand in your way. But I need you to know I've grown to care for her. She's become part of me." The woman stepped closer, her bare feet brushing the wooden boards of the porch. She shook her head slowly. "I don't want to take her from you," she whispered. "I only wanted to see her, to know she was safe. I thought I would never be able to keep her alive on my own." Her eyes met his then, clear and unwavering. "But you did. You saved her." Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest, though another settled in its place. He realized she was not here to fight him, not here to tear the child away. She was here because she needed help, because her story was not yet over. "Come inside," he said quietly. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." For a moment she hesitated, as though afraid to accept. But then she nodded, stepping into the house for the first time. She moved slowly, almost cautiously, her eyes darting around as if expecting danger to follow. Daniel set the baby down in the cradle he had built, and the child drifted back into sleep. The woman watched with wide eyes, her expression softening as she saw the gentle care Daniel gave. He poured her a cup of water and set a small plate of bread and beans before her. She ate slowly, each bite careful, as though she had not trusted her hunger for days. Between bites, she began to speak. Her words came haltingly at first, but then the story spilled out. She told him of how she had lost her family to sickness and raids, how she had been left alone with nothing but her newborn. She told him of men who had hunted her because of debts her late husband owed, and how she had fled into the desert, knowing she could not outrun them with a child in her arms. That was why she had left the baby, because she believed it was the only way her daughter might survive. Daniel listened without interrupting, his eyes steady on her as she spoke. Every word deepened his respect for her strength. She was not weak, as some might have thought. She was not careless. She was a mother who had been forced to make a choice no mother should ever have to make. When she finished, silence fell again. She lowered her head, ashamed of her story, ashamed of the desperation that had led her to his door. But Daniel shook his head firmly. "You did what you had to do," he said. "You saved her life. That's not something to be ashamed of." Her eyes met his, filled with gratitude, though also with uncertainty. "And now?" she asked softly. "What happens now?" Daniel looked at the baby, then back at her. His voice was low but steady. "Now you stay. You don't have to run anymore. Not from me, not from anyone. If you let me, I'll help you. We can keep her safe together." Her lips parted in surprise. For a moment she seemed unsure, almost frightened by the offer. She had been alone for so long that the thought of trusting another was almost too much to believe. Yet when she looked at the sleeping child and then back at the man before her, she saw something she had not seen in years: hope. That night, for the first time in weeks, she slept without fear, the baby resting peacefully beside her. Daniel sat by the fire, watching over them both, knowing the road ahead would not be easy, but also knowing this was the beginning of something he had never expected. The days after the woman's return changed everything in Daniel's home. What had once been only his responsibility was now shared, though it took time for both of them to adjust. She was cautious, moving about the house with quiet steps as if she feared being told to leave again. Daniel gave her space, but he also made it clear that she was welcome. Whenever she tried to take the baby from him, he didn't resist, but neither did he step away from caring. Instead, he began to show her the little things he had learned: how to warm the milk properly, how to hold the child against his shoulder to ease her cries, how to hum softly when rocking her to sleep. At first, she looked at him with disbelief. It was strange for her to see a man, especially one she had barely known, so gentle with her child. But each time she saw the baby calm in his arms, each time she heard the quiet patience in his voice, something inside her began to soften. She had thought she was alone in this world, but Daniel was proving that perhaps she didn't have to be. They spoke more now. Not much, but enough. She told him her name, Elena. Saying it out loud felt like giving away a piece of herself, but she wanted him to know. Daniel said her name slowly, almost carefully, as though it was something fragile. She asked about his life, and he told her in simple words about his quiet days before she came, about his work in the fields, and how he had lived alone for many years after losing his parents. There was no bitterness in his voice, just fact. Elena listened, surprised by how much she wanted to know about this man who had taken her child in without question, but mistrust was not so easily erased. Elena often woke in the night, sitting up quickly, her eyes darting toward the door or window as though expecting someone to burst inside. Daniel noticed. He did not question her, but he began keeping watch more carefully, staying up later, sitting near the fire with his rifle by his side. He never said it aloud, but his actions told her he understood. He knew danger was not far behind her. The baby, however, brought them both moments of peace. Little Star, as Daniel still called her, was thriving. She had grown fuller and stronger in the weeks since she had been left at his door. Elena would often smile softly as she watched Daniel play with the child, lifting her gently into the air or making quiet noises that drew laughter from the tiny mouth. It was a sight Elena had never thought she would see. A man who was not her kin, yet who treated her daughter as if she were his own blood. One afternoon, Elena tried to tell him she would leave soon. She had stayed longer than she had planned, and though his house felt safe, she knew the men she had fled would not give up easily. "It's better if I keep moving," she whispered, her hands trembling as she folded the baby's blanket. Daniel looked at her for a long time before answering. His voice was calm but firm. "If you walk out that door again, they will find you, and this time you may not make it back." Elena's eyes filled with tears, though she tried to hide them. "I don't want to put you in danger," she said. "You've already done more than I could ever ask." Daniel stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You are not alone anymore. If you leave, you're not just running from them. You're running from the chance to build something stronger. Let me help. Let me stand with you." The words stunned her. She had not expected him to speak with such certainty. For so long, she had been the only one carrying her burden. To hear someone else say he would share it was almost too much to believe. But there was no doubt in his eyes, no hesitation. Slowly, she nodded, though fear still lingered in her heart. The following days were different. They began working together in a way that felt almost natural. Elena took care of the baby's needs while Daniel repaired the fence around the property and kept the firewood stacked high. She started cooking meals for them, using old recipes her mother had taught her. Daniel, who had lived on little more than bread and beans for years, found himself sitting at a table with warm food that carried the taste of tradition and memory. Still, challenges rose. The townsfolk noticed Elena's presence and whispers grew louder. Some people were kind, but others were sharp-tongued, questioning why Daniel had taken her in. "It isn't proper," one man muttered at the market. "That child ain't his, and now he's housing the mother too." The words stung, but Daniel ignored them. Elena, however, heard every whisper, and each one cut deeper. She had always been an outsider in town, and now even more so, but each time doubt threatened to pull her down. She remembered the way Daniel looked at her child, the steady care in his eyes, and she found strength to hold her head higher. One evening, a storm rolled in across the desert. The wind howled against the house and the rain fell in heavy sheets. Inside, Daniel and Elena worked together to keep the fire alive and to calm the baby, who cried at the thunder. When the storm reached its height, a sharp knock sounded on the door. Both froze. Daniel's hand went immediately to his rifle while Elena clutched the baby tightly. The knock came again, louder this time. Daniel motioned for her to stay back as he stepped to the door. He opened it just enough to see outside. Two men stood there, their coats soaked, their eyes scanning the house. Strangers. Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" he asked firmly. One of the men tipped his hat. "Storm's rough. We're looking for shelter, just for the night." Daniel studied them, his instincts telling him something was wrong. He glanced at Elena, whose face had gone pale. Her grip on the baby tightened, and Daniel understood. These men were not simply travelers. They were connected to the ones she had been running from. "I don't have room," Daniel said flatly, and shut the door before they could argue. The men pounded on the wood for a while, cursing under their breath, but eventually the sound faded as the storm swallowed them. Daniel stood guard by the door until the rain stopped, his rifle never leaving his side. Elena sat nearby, her eyes wide with both fear and relief. That night, after the storm passed and the baby finally slept, Elena looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to protect me," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "Yes, I did. You and the child are here now. That makes you my responsibility, and I won't let anyone harm you." For the first time in a long time, Elena felt something she had almost forgotten. Trust. She had doubted, feared, and carried her burden alone. But now, as she watched Daniel by the fire, steady and strong, she knew she was no longer carrying it by herself. The choice she had made to leave her baby at his door had changed everything. She had not just found safety for her child, she had found someone who was willing to fight for them both. And as the night grew quiet again, with the desert air fresh after the storm, Elena realized that perhaps she was no longer just a desperate woman on the run. Perhaps with Daniel by her side, she was finally beginning to find a home. Morning came clear after the storm, the desert washed fresh by the rain. The air smelled of earth, and the sky stretched wide and bright above the hills. Daniel stood outside his small house, repairing a loose shutter the wind had broken. Inside, Elena hummed softly while cradling the baby, her voice carrying through the open window. For a moment, Daniel stopped working and listened. It was the first time he had heard her sing, and the sound was gentle, filled with warmth. He realized that despite everything she had endured, some part of her still carried peace enough to sing. But the peace could not last long. The men from the night before had not come to his door by chance. They had been searching, and now they knew where to look. Daniel sensed it deep in his bones. The danger was not gone. He could not allow himself to be caught unprepared. Over the next days, Daniel and Elena worked together to strengthen their home. Daniel repaired the fence, reinforced the door, and made sure the rifle was always within reach. Elena, though uneasy, did not try to stop him. She knew he was right. She too had lived too long looking over her shoulder to believe safety was permanent. But even as fear lingered, there was a strange comfort in knowing she was no longer facing it alone. The townsfolk began to notice the change. Where once they had seen a quiet, solitary man, now they saw someone walking the market with a woman and child at his side. Whispers turned into open stares. Some nodded with respect, but others looked on with disapproval. A few muttered harsh words about how Daniel was taking in trouble and protecting people who didn't belong. Daniel ignored them. Elena kept her eyes low, but the weight of their words pressed on her. One afternoon, an older man named Mr. Keller approached Daniel at the market. "You're risking a lot, Reed," he said in a low voice. "Those men you turned away the other night, they were asking questions in town. They're looking for her. If you keep sheltering her, you're drawing danger to all of us." Daniel met the man's eyes, steady and calm. "She and the child stay with me." "That's not changing," Mr. Keller sighed, shaking his head. "You're stubborn, boy. Just be ready. Trouble doesn't pass by when it's invited in." With that, he walked away. Daniel said nothing, but inside his resolve only grew stronger. He had made a promise not only to Elena but to himself. He would not let anyone take her or the baby away. That evening, he told Elena about the warning. Her face went pale, and her hands trembled as she held the baby close. "I should go," she whispered. "If they find me here, they'll hurt you. They might hurt everyone in this town. I can't bring that upon you." Daniel placed his hand firmly on her shoulder. "No," he said quietly. "Leaving won't stop them. They'll keep hunting you, no matter where you run. But if we stand together, we have a chance. I won't let you face this alone." His words struck her deeply. For so long she had been running, believing that running was the only way to survive. Now here was a man telling her the opposite, that sometimes survival meant standing still, facing what came and fighting for a place to belong. The baby stirred in her arms, looking up at both of them with wide eyes, innocent and trusting. Elena realized then that this was no longer just about escaping danger. It was about building a life, one that her child could grow into without fear. The danger came sooner than either of them expected. 2 nights later, as the moon cast silver light across the desert, the sound of horses approached. Daniel heard them first and motioned for Elena to stay inside with the baby. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. 4 men rode up, the same ones who had knocked on his door before, and 2 more besides. Their faces were hard, their eyes sharp with intent. "We know she's here," the leader called out. "Give her up and no harm will come to you." Daniel's voice was calm but unyielding. "There's no one here you're looking for." The men laughed bitterly. "Don't lie, Reed, we saw her." "We know she's hiding in there. Hand her over." Inside the house, Elena clutched her child tightly, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream, to beg Daniel not to risk himself. But she also knew that if she walked out, her life and her child's would be over. She stayed silent, trusting the man who had already done more for her than anyone ever had. Daniel stood tall on the porch, his grip steady on the rifle. "You'll leave this place now," he said firmly. "You won't come back. If you do, you'll find out I'm not a man who makes empty threats." The leader sneered. "You'd risk your life for an Apache woman and her brat?" Daniel's eyes hardened. "I'd risk my life for family, and that's what they are now." The words cut through the night, stronger than the wind itself. The men shifted uneasily, muttering among themselves. They had expected fear, not defiance. Finally, the leader spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he growled. With a sharp tug on the reins, he turned his horse, and the others followed. Their silhouettes disappeared into the desert, leaving only silence behind. When Daniel stepped back inside, Elena was waiting, tears streaming down her face. She ran to him, clutching his arm with one hand while holding the baby with the other. "You could have been killed," she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel looked at her gently. "So could you. So could she. But as long as I'm here, I'll stand between you and them. That's my choice." Elena lowered her head, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. She had never asked for this, never expected anyone to fight for her. But Daniel had done it without hesitation. In that moment, she realized he was no longer just the man who had taken her child in. He had become something more, a protector, a partner, and perhaps in time something even greater. From that day forward, the 3 of them were no longer just individuals bound by circumstance. They became a family. The town still whispered, some with suspicion, others with admiration. But Daniel and Elena no longer cared. Together they worked, they cooked, they cared for the baby, and they watched the horizon with steady hearts. The baby thrived, laughing more often, growing stronger each day. Elena smiled more now, her fear slowly giving way to hope. Daniel, who had once lived in silence, found joy in the simple sound of voices filling his home. The bond between them deepened, not rushed but steady, built from trust and sacrifice. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in gold, Daniel sat with Elena and the baby outside the house. The wind was calm, carrying only the sound of crickets. Elena looked at him, her eyes soft. "When I left her at your door, I thought I had lost everything," she said quietly. "But I didn't know I was finding something new." Daniel looked at the child in her arms, then back at Elena. His voice was steady, filled with quiet certainty. "Sometimes family finds us in ways we don't expect." And in that moment, under the wide desert sky, the three of them knew their journey had changed forever. What had begun in fear and desperation had become something far stronger. A bond not of blood alone, but of choice, of trust, and of love. Against all odds, they had built a home, and no matter what challenges still lay ahead, they would face them together.